Good afternoon. On this rainy, cold afternoon, you guys get golden stars for joining us for our last second half lecture of the spring. But our speaker is sure to deliver. Valerie Bassett is the executive director of the Women's Fund, which is a fund of the Community Foundation of Southeastern Massachusetts. A graduate of Brown University with a major in American Civilization and a writing degree from Emerson College. Valerie has done amazing things for New Bedford and will really give us the current story of women and their struggles and their successes. So without further ado, thank you, Val, for being here.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay, all it takes is turning it on. And how many of you are from or live in or connected primarily to New Bedford in the region? So the majority. And how about Fall River? Okay, a few. Okay. Sarah had just told me that a number of you would be from Fall River, and I focused the data on this in New Bedford, and that's predominantly where the Women's Fund does our work, even though we serve a greater group, and as our work grows, we're partnering more and doing more in the broader region. But a lot of the story of women in New Bedford is very much the story of women in Fall River with, some minor differences, so to keep that in mind. So as Sarah said, I head the Women's Fund of Southeastern Massachusetts, and so I'll tell you our mission, and that sort of gives you my framework in telling you the story of women in New Bedford today and what are key issues. And our mission at the Women's Fund, or our focus right now, is on increasing the percentage of women in the region earning a living wage. So enhancing the educational attainment and economic security of women and girls in the region. And hopefully, as I walk through this, you'll see why that's important, and you'll all see my framework is one of economic justice. In looking at these issues. Whoops, wrong direction, that told me so. So who are the women of New Bedford? Beautiful, smart, resilient, creative, determined, hardworking. There's some bad news in this presentation, but underlying it all is also definite incredible strength and resilience, certainly historically and certainly in the present day. Women get the job done. Women, do what it takes. So I wanted to start with some strength and hopefully come back to that at the end and weave it throughout, while also talking about the barriers and challenges that women face. So New Bedford women are diverse. Almost 1/4 identify as women of color, meaning they didn't, in the census, say they were all white, only white. Over 13% born outside the US. We know this is actually higher. That's a low estimate, but that's what was reported in the census, the last census. Working, the workforce is just under half women. And just getting by. So the median income for women in New Bedford it's actually just the same as for women in Fall River, and it's significantly lower than the state average at about $33,000 a year. Parenting, and often alone. So women in New Bedford, the average family size is 3 people, or 2.67, and between 1/3 and 40% of families with children are headed by single women. And I would say moderately educated. And again, lower educational levels than the rest of the state, with about 19% with a college degree. What else? And so these are pictures of some women at the Women's March in Boston this January. Sarah, Stormy, and Amari, these, the two women and one of their sons are women in our Life Work project, which helps low-income women get on the path to a living wage. So what else do we know about women in New Bedford that's sort of that lays the groundwork for the story of women right now? And their stories can help tell that story, and I will come back to that. Women in New Bedford have children at a younger age than the rest of the state. And the teen pregnancy rate, while it's gone down a lot, is still twice as high as the state average. Women in New Bedford are more likely to have their moms or an aunt or an extended family member take care of very young children. And there are, of course, pros and cons to that. It can help make a lot of things work, and it can be very good. At the same time, we know there are advantages of structured preschool, and there's a small percentage compared to the state average of young children who are in preschool in New Bedford. Women in a survey that we did a number of years ago did say that they would like to continue and get more education, the 80% who have not gotten a college degree or more. But they reported the top barriers as number 1, money, number 2, time, and number 3, the lack of childcare for them to be able to do it. Time and childcare, well, all three, time, money, and childcare are really of a piece. And so I'll say a little bit, I'll give a quick bit about Stormy's story, which she has shared other places, to kind of paint a picture. And again, our work is predominantly with low, in terms of this program, the Life Work Project, predominantly with low-income women, so below that median income. So this is a story on the lower end of the income spectrum, but it has pieces in it that I think resonate with a lot of women in the area. So Stormy actually grew up in Fall River, was born and grew up in Fall River, got married and had a child young and moved away. The relationship ended up not being a good one, and that led to a lot of very, very bad problems. And she ended up living alone with her son in New Bedford, and ultimately deciding in her later 20s to go back to school, to Bristol Community College, to try to get her degree. And she's been on public assistance, TANF, welfare, and she uses state vouchers for childcare, and has to, report on the hours she's working in school a week in order to maintain those, and she'll only have them for a certain amount of time. She's earned her associate's degree, and she's now in her second year at UMass Dartmouth, and she wants to go on to get her graduate degree and work in social work. And she's doing great. She's facing a lot of the struggles that we'll be talking about today. What else about the women in New Bedford? I guess I can look at this. We face a bigger gender wage gap in both New Bedford and Fall River than women in the rest of the state. Women in New Bedford rely more on public funding for everything from childcare to housing, again, than the state average. These are really about state average, except for the last, they're all about state averages. Women here have higher rates of substance abuse, HIV, chlamydia, which is a sexually transmitted infection, and lower rates of prenatal care. About 78% are registered to vote, and 53% in one survey reported that they always vote. So I'm going to step back and look at the big picture, kind of dense text here, but I'll just kind of explain the concept. So when we talk about women and the economic status of women in New Bedford, it's really, it's the story with some variations of women in the United States, women in America, women in this economy, where things are still really structured around a reality of women being at home and not so much working for income, so that they were available for taking care of children and extended family members and work around the house. Now, lots of women have always worked. Now, obviously, most work. But our economy, our policies haven't caught up with this. So a couple of things that affect how much the jobs women choose, the jobs they get hired for, how they get promoted or not, what they get paid, are affected by a couple of key things. That women continue to do most of the caretaking, whether it's for our parents, our kids, and women continue to do most of the domestic work. And so the kind of need to be available for these things and what employers imagine about that has an effect. So we know that single mothers are the most likely to live in poverty, and they are really hitting the kind of perfect storm of the challenges of being a woman and trying to work, not being able to get childcare, not earning enough to pay for childcare, not having, therefore, the time or the money to go to school. And being very poor is sticky, as they say, as the economists say, meaning it's very hard to get out of it because you're often trapped. So what it would take for a single working mother of two to get by in this region, we call that the living wage, is about $25 an hour. And that means so not to have to rely on any public benefits and to be completely self-sufficient. Now, as you can see, that's well over the median for all women in New Bedford, although that number doesn't take into account household size. The median income for single women is only $19,000 in New Bedford. So that's no matter their household size, but nonetheless, it shows you a gap. We have a gap here. So we know this is a region that the big cities have economic struggles, and that women are really facing the brunt of those struggles economically. And as I said before, between a third and a quarter of New Bedford families with kids are headed by a single woman, and almost 40% of those are living at or below the poverty level. So to just give you a quick look at what this living wage is about, MIT has, the MIT living wage calculator was created so that you can plug in your town or zip code, and based on the cost of living in that town, it will say, what do you need to earn to pay for all those costs? And those costs vary depending on how many people in your family. So they're composed of transportation, housing, medical. As you'll see, childcare, I have a little pointer there. Childcare is the biggest single cost. So that's something that we'll come back to again and again, and the biggest challenge. So if we look at the cost here, the monthly earnings for women in New Bedford are, I lost my pointer somehow, but the big blue bar is the monthly earnings. There's a gap of $8.45 an hour. And again, looking at it in the context of different family size, the median salary for all New Bedford women is the red line, and you can see for one adult, you're okay, even at the median income for single women of $19,000. But as you add children, you're more and more likely to be in poverty and to have a much more difficult time at that level, especially without an additional income in the household. So another part of this situation, and they all tie in together, is the wage gap I mentioned earlier that women face. And as I said, women in Fall River, New Bedford have a bigger wage gap than men. And this is a complicated issue. We could spend a whole day talking about this, but we'll just hit a few points about this right now as we think about the problems and the solutions and how women are coping. So we can see that it's true across educational level and in different sectors. So it can't be answered only by women going into certain traditionally underpaid jobs or different educational levels. Again, without getting too much in the weeds, the people who study and spend a lot of time thinking about the wage gap, and I think of the wage gap as important for many reasons. There's fairness, but it's also part of the solution to women's poverty and to raising the next generation so that the kids are not growing up in poverty, because essentially that unpaid money, if you will, is left. You can't afford to leave it on the table and not take it home to take care of the families. So this is an economic issue for families and communities. So we're going to walk through a little bit of these components that help contribute to the wage gap. One is a phenomenon that's called the Motherhood Penalty that a researcher at UMass Amherst has done some really interesting work analyzing. And I have her name here and a link to her research and article, where even if you control for things that affect women's ability to work if they're the predominant child care provider, such as they might take time off, they might reduce their hours, they might choose, a more flexible, lower-paying job while childcare. Even if you control for all of that, there is still a phenomenon that they lose wages with every child. And so this really goes, it looks like, to kind of unconscious discrimination. So that, as I mentioned earlier, an employer's perception of a woman's availability or ability to do her job well after becoming a mother, she gets penalized with some unconscious notion that now she's not going to be as good or as available. This happens more intensely for low-wage workers. For women in the highest 10% of earning, it really doesn't happen. And that may be because women at that level can or are expected to be able to hire other people to do the things that at a lower wage level, people think they're going to have to go do, taking care of their kids, cooking, et cetera. The other thing that is sort of tucked in here, but that's important to remember, is that women are disproportionately working low-wage jobs, and we'll come back to this again and talk more about that. So this is a big problem. A study by the Pew Research Center showed that moms with kids under 18, and it's even worse for younger children, were 3 times more likely than the fathers to say being a working parent made it harder for them to advance in their job and career. Again, a sign that workplaces, the educational system, are not set up for working families, 2-parent working families, single mother working families. So I'm going to kind of walk just quickly as we go along through solutions, because Sarah, I'm supposed to stop at about 3, is that right? 3:50, okay. So, one is really thinking a little differently about our educational system. You could think of it as just increasing access to early education or after-school care, essentially expanding the time that there's public care and education for children to better match the workday. So one step towards that is a universal pre-K, the idea that kids up to, starting at 2.9 will all have public preschool. Instead of right now we have a little bit for some kids, and then we have vouchers for childcare for poorer women. But really this is an issue for all women being able to afford and get childcare. So the idea here is to benefit women of all income levels, but especially lower income levels. Paid family and medical leave is most critical for low-wage women who don't tend to have that flexibility and who suffer most from losing those wages. Again, we're like the only developed nation and one of, I think, 2 countries in the world that doesn't provide paid parental leave. So this is clearly something other places value. I'm not sure why we're the last in the world to do this, but there are a lot of efforts afoot nationally and at the state level to pass regulation to create a kind of fund, like an insurance fund that employees and employers would pay into. And then if you need to take a leave for a new child or a sick family member, you could be paid a percentage of your salary. And then the last one, again, this is not a solution for, kind of employer discrimination against, or implicit or explicit discrimination against pregnant women or parenting women, but it is something to keep in mind because it relates to the solution, which is we want to increase planned pregnancies, because that helps women be more economically ready. And that is something that when we saw the rates, for example, of of STIs, of lower prenatal care, of HIV infection, of teen pregnancy. Those are all symptoms of not having a strong enough family planning care system. So this is something that we need to do better in this region, both in terms of health and sex education, access to contraception, and family and reproductive health overall. So education is a key part of the solution, and we can see that if you look at earnings here, that as women in New Bedford have degrees, their income rises significantly. The number on the right, 928,000, let me see if I can get my pointer to work, represents lifetime wages lost if you don't have a bachelor's. So this is a pretty compelling case to aim for at least a bachelor's, and in this region that's particularly true. If not a bachelor's, then a certification or degree that's strongly connected to a living wage, whether that's the building trades or a healthcare job. And that's one thing our Life Work Project does, is we really look with women at the careers and educational paths they're choosing to make sure it's heading towards economic self-sufficiency and a living wage job. So, and women in the region are earning diplomas and degrees, but still not enough. Again, we see, college graduates, still it's a little higher than men, but it's still a small percentage between, well, college and graduate and professional degrees. So that's a goal for women and us collectively is to increase that. So looking at this area in terms of education, just quickly, what are some of the barriers or the solutions? Actually, the solutions really here. Clearly one is to invest in education, both at the state level, at the local level, and for foundations and philanthropists. And really beginning in the early education level up through highest, because we can't get more people ready and to bachelor degrees if those girls aren't coming into kindergarten ready. And so early literacy preparation, quality early education in preschool is just as critical as getting out of high school and from high school on to higher degrees. And I think they're not often seen equally, but it is absolutely all of a piece. We need stronger pathways from high school to college, or high school to community college, and from community college to four-year programs. And there are a lot of people working on this. I'll say more about that later. But we know those are places where people start, especially women, especially if they become parents early, and that it's hard to stay. Because again, colleges, community colleges are not fully geared towards parenting students, so that there are a lot of challenges there. So some of that is making those places more parent-friendly, and some of that is strengthening the pathways. And another pathway that I put in here, and I'll say more about, is, again, creating other living wage pathways. If it's not college, if it's not academic, creating a pre-apprenticeship program in the building trades, creating other pathways that lead to non-traditional jobs, technical skills and careers, wind power technicians, things where there will be jobs that earn a living wage. Women need to be part of that equation. And all too often, economic development plans are founded on jobs that are traditionally male, whether it's construction or technical or alternative energy. And so that's another really critical thing for all of us, to keep the focus on women's participation and access in those education training programs and the jobs. Because as we've seen, it's much more frequently women raising the next generation, and so that's really the region's economic future. We need more ESOL. As I said, there's a growing population of folks coming in from other countries. That's always been true in New Bedford, and Fall River, and it's different groups over time. And in order to integrate into the economy, those women need English language skills, and there's always a wait list to get into classes. There's a strong correlation between unionized jobs and living wage. And so you want to see opportunities for unionization or collective bargaining or union jobs for women. So in addition, so this is occupational, and where is this coming from? I guess this is, I think this is Vogue. Excuse me one second, I want to. Okay, so this is in BCC, that's what it is. So this looks at the overall, the expected living wage, the expected salary that you can get in a different field, and then the percent of people going into that field. And as you can see, you could call it self-segregation, but there's a long process as girls grow up of how that happens, that they end up into these careers, as well as these careers being underpaid. But protective service, you know, whether that's police or firefighters, you know, again, a small minority are women, has a living wage salary. Computer and math related, a good, healthy percentage is women, but not fully half. But that's also in the living wage range for a family of 3. Health practitioner occupation, predominantly women. And it's a good median salary, so that can definitely be living wage, although we know that in that area, if you look at some of the entry-level positions where many women get stuck as CNAs or sometimes assistants, that can be a dead-end, non-living wage job. And so one thing is to create pathways so that women can continue to learn and get certified and move into higher wage healthcare positions. So we know that occupational segregation counts for a big chunk of the wage gap. And so, as I said, there's sort of 2 parts to that. One is we need to solve the problem of underpaying for work that women traditionally do, work with people, caretaking work. Why do we pay so little for that? That's a problem. At the same time, we have to work with that reality and try to direct and encourage girls to living wage pathways, especially given that there's a good likelihood that they will be the breadwinner, a head of household as a single parent. And I think that there's still a cultural expectation that girls grow up with, that they will be able to rely on someone else's salary. And I think that we need to shift that around and think of that as the icing on the cake if that happens, but to raise girls to expect to be able to economically take care of themselves and their children. And so obviously we need to take a look at all of the educational and training and workforce development systems and how are they helping, how might they be reinforcing the problem, and how can we do better. So now looking at some of the local educational institutions, we see how this plays out. So these are figures from Greater New Bedford Vocational and Technical High School from a few years ago to see what girls went into and what boys went into. I won't walk through every single one, but I'll pick the upper right and lower left corners, which are the most dramatic. Lower left is computers and IT, and girls were only 32% of the people who in high school were choosing to focus on that area. And we know that can lead to a good career. With carpentry, it's hard to avoid. That's even a better wage, and you had fewer girls going into that. However, cosmetology is almost exclusively females going into that in high school, and it's among the lowest. That and arts and design and media, the lowest average wage. Again, workforce training programs. So one study looked at this and really did observe a pattern where, again, not with any negative intent, but these programs sorted women into training programs for traditionally female and traditionally underpaid jobs. And so these are unemployed women, women in transition, poor women who are trying to, through employment services, get some training, get a better job and, move forward out of poverty, have some economic mobility. But often the jobs they're being trained for might make them not unemployed, but still have to rely on public benefits and not really make enough to get by. Sometimes those can be ladder jobs where you can keep growing, not always. So again, I won't walk through it in detail, but you can see the percentage of men, that's the black bar, and the women in the pink bar, and there's a big gap. So this is the BCC chart. So the degrees earned by men and women, some ones that are strongly different. Women really dominate in human services, office administration, and culinary, and men in criminal justice, engineering, and computer information systems. And again, if there weren't such a wage gap in those different careers, but that's a reality that we can't ignore. It plays out every day. UMass Dartmouth, 2013 degrees. This is down from the top. The top is predominantly female, and the bottom is predominantly male. This doesn't show the average earnings of these degrees, but we know that it varies widely. So what are some of the solutions? Investing in STEAM programs for girls, STEAM being science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and that's a newer thing to integrate the arts into there. And one of the things we know is that if girls often find more connection to math and science through creative approaches to it. Increase girls' exposure to non-traditional careers. This is really critical. Strengthen girls' leadership and young women, everything from self-esteem to really leadership. Increase mentorship programs, and again, pre-apprenticeship program in the building trades or other non-traditional pathways. So in the final category of looking at the landscape of women in New Bedford, what role do women play in leading and making decisions about all the things we just talked about and everything else? So if we look at data on the firms and businesses, women own a little over a third, which is great progress, but it's still a minority of firms. If we look at the biggest employers, the vast majority of those are led by men. If we look at the economic development organizations in the region, they are not being led by women. I would say that women do a lot of economic development work, but not necessarily in organizations that are called economic development. I think the work we do at the Women's Fund and the YWCA and many others working to support women is economic development, but it's not under that heading. Social profits, they're also called nonprofits, but we're working to create profit, but in the social sector. So there are some of the major educational institutions led by women, but again, most of the biggest social profits are led by men. We look to government, and we did some research on this with UMass Dartmouth Political Science Department a couple of years ago, because a report came out about ranking states in their women's political participation. And Massachusetts did not get the best grade. Fewer than 1/3 of Bristol County city and town elected officials are women. In New Bedford, obviously the mayor is a man right now. The city council, decent, a little over 1/3 women. School committee, 0 women right now. The state delegation, meaning the senator and representatives that represent this district, no women. Fall River, a little better, but for New Bedford, no women. So again, we know the data really show that not only does government work better overall when there are more women, but women tend to make different kinds of decisions around all of the things we just spoke about. And so for many reasons, it's important to engage women in the civic process and ultimately elect more diverse women. And so some solutions are, again, starting with girls and getting civic engagement and education for girls, doing advocacy and leadership development. So some of us are working on programs like Action for Women of Southeastern Massachusetts. Last week, we took a group of 120 to the State House for Women's Advocacy Day to talk about early education and paid family leave. And our goal in doing that is not only to move those issues forward, but also to engage new girls and women and men and boys. We take high school classes from Global Learning and Diamond to understand these issues and to feel empowered to make change. We also want to see training programs are one way. You know, women often, they are elected when they run, but we don't run for office at anywhere near the rate that men do. So one thing that's effective is to provide a supportive program for women to run together and learn about it together. And so that's a solution. And then we've got to elect them. So when we look back at so we've talked about women and we've talked about some of the barriers, but to sort of bring it together and looking at, is this a region that supports women? Does New Bedford support women in key ways? Women, we know, helped build New Bedford and have contributed over the years to absolutely everything, from the factories to raising children to starting settlement houses to the artistic community to activism. But what do we have that helps us thrive or not? And we do have a lot that's worth not taking for granted in terms of there are a lot of organizations like ours and others, the Women's Center, the YWCA, that prioritize and focus on women and girls. We do have a lot of basic supports and rights and protections in Massachusetts and therefore locally. However, as we just talked about, there are some gaps and some areas that we could do better. As I just said, the state scored B- for women's political participation, and worse, a C- for family-friendly work policies. We don't yet have universal pre-K, although the good news is it's a priority for Superintendent Durkin. It's also a priority in Fall River, from what I understand. And folks are working to get money from the state, and we want the city to be able to commit money to move forward with a universal pre-K program. We have a statewide wait list for vouchers for low-income women who are eligible, but there are not enough vouchers for them to get childcare. So again, we need to invest in early education at the state and local level. No paid family and medical leave, no childcare in the New Bedford campus of BCC, and UMass Dartmouth closed their childcare center on the campus. Based on the data and what we talked about, we know there's inadequate access to family planning and health education. We need strong public transportation for work and school. We know that people are heavily reliant on cars and driving in this region. And we know there's big gaps in public transportation as well, even while there are improvements. So, what's happening? So now I'm starting to tell some good stories, I hope, where the good news is that, and this is one of the things that I've been profoundly moved by, is to see how much women in New Bedford want to help other women. You know, I think sisterhood is powerful, as they say, and I think it's true here as anywhere else, if not more so. You know, I think sometimes when there's extra burdens, there's extra bonds and extra resilience. So, and you know, I would be remiss to not say there are many supportive men as well in this effort. So what are these folks who care and are trying to make things better do? Well, many things. Not all of them are up here, but I'm just going to focus on a few that I know about and am involved with. So we are working on this through the program I mentioned, the Life Work Project, to help a group of 30 women who are in BCC get on the path to a living wage. It's a 5-year program, and you're invited to come back here in a couple weeks, June 8th, to celebrate the graduations of women in that program who've earned a degree or certificate. You can go on the Women's Fund Facebook page or our website to find out more. We also have an initiative called the Economic Blueprint for Women that brings together a lot of community leaders and it's made a plan about how do we make solutions to all of these issues. And so you can be involved in that or stay tuned for more about that, but that's going forward actively. The YWCA has great programs for women, housing, health education, support groups, childcare. The Women's Center obviously is serving the needs of women facing domestic violence, sexual assault, and doing really important work there and with counseling and shelter. Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women, focusing on legislative issues and women's civic engagement. Our sister school, educating girls as leaders. And we've been partnering with Bristol Community College and UMass Dartmouth on those educational pathways that I talked about, and they're both doing work on women in STEAM. And as I said, there are many more. So there's a lot going on to improve the situation of women in New Bedford and the region. Even though there's a ways to go, there's a lot of energy and activity. So I thought I would end with telling a success story of one of the women in an earlier picture, Sarah Borden. Sarah is a LifeWork participant, so she had 3 children and decided to earn her associate's degree. She was working at the Wamsutta Club and signed up and got involved in the LifeWork project, decided to go into nursing, was accepted into the very competitive nursing program at BCC, graduated last year with a degree, and is now a student in nursing at UMass Dartmouth, and just got a job a couple months ago as a nurse, and is now for the first time making a living wage and is able to support herself and her 3 children independently. So that's a big benchmark for her and her family and our program. And she's going to be the keynote speaker at our LifeWork project as the first person to achieve that goal in that group and talk about what it means. And I think one thing that characterizes her and her story is also true for so many New Bedford women, is that she wants to make a better life for herself and her children. She wants to do better so that her children can do better. She wants to be an example for them, as well as provide for them. She wants them to have the best education they can have so they can succeed. And so we know that women and mothers are very motivated by many things, but including the well-being of our children and the next generation. And so we have that to fuel us. I think we can continue to make things better and accomplish a lot more. So with that, I will wrap it up and be happy to have a conversation.
We're all so quiet.
Could you tell us what the reason was for stopping the childcare at UMass Dartmouth? Was it money? Was it because they didn't have children to go in the childcare, or was there another reason?
I can't speak to all the details, but from what I understand, well, from what I know, it is a financially challenging business to run a child care center profitably. There are a lot of requirements, a lot of state involvement and insurance and et cetera. So that is a fact. It really needs to be subsidized, again, either by the state and or in this case the university to be successful. So obviously financial, even if you have a full slot of kids, is going to be some pressure financially. If you're making cuts, I can imagine that being a candidate. As I understood, I think they predominantly were serving faculty at the time it closed, and that can sometimes be a problem that child care centers have to really look at. Again, it's partly financial, because if you want to be available to students, you need subsidized slots or you need students with vouchers, whereas your faculty is more likely to be able to be full pay. And so you have to have a commitment to being able to have student access. So I think it was predominantly financial, from what I've understood, and just not as much a priority at the time as other things. So that's, I think always how those decisions get made. I understand there are conversations afoot. It's a big endeavor. There's new leadership there, so any of us who care can raise that with the leadership and key folks there and keep it on the table.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the Women's Fund, where you get your funding sources, volunteers, number of
Sure.
employees, stuff like that?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank you.
So we've been around, this is our 16th year now, and we've got some founding mothers in the room here. And So we started out all volunteer for a long time, and currently we have 3 operations staff, myself and 2 part-time staff, an administrative and marketing officer and a development director. And then we have the LifeWork staff, because we're currently incubating the LifeWork project, and that has 2 staff, 1 full-time director and 1 part-time coordinator, and they serve as coaches to the women and kind of oversee the program. So and our annual budget for all of the things we do is a little over $300,000. So we're lean and mean, and it's a mixture. So our LifeWork project has a large percentage of funding is from local foundations and several banks that have been great supporters, and then individuals who supported that as well. And then for our operations work and our action fund, which is what we make other grants of, that is, the vast majority of that is individuals. We do, for a couple of events, our Tiara 5K Mother's Day road race and our leadership breakfast in the fall. We do have corporate sponsors who contribute in that way. But otherwise, we ask you guys to give us money. Go on our website. We send letters. We just finished a Mother's Day appeal. So in terms of giving, if you're interested in our approach to solving these problems, go on our website. Like us on Facebook, sign up for our emails, and then figure out how you want to get involved. In terms of volunteering, it's predominantly working on our committees. So in terms of, we're not a direct service organization. The one place where we do have sort of individual volunteer opportunities is for mentors with the LifeWork participants, although there are not any currently new women, so there's no new mentors needed from what I understand, but periodically there are needs for new mentors, or sometimes people with particular expertise, whether for pro bono legal work or financial advising, to help the women. And often women in different careers, we have them have informational interviews with or shadow somebody who's in a career that they're interested with. And they often need internships and jobs. So, we're always looking for partners who want to support women's economic mobility in that way. But we have a number of committees we're looking for people for all the time: our finance committee, our events committee, our marketing committee. And you can, again, go to our website, and there's a form to fill out, or you can email me. My email's on the website. If you're interested in getting more involved. And like I said, a couple of events coming up I would draw your attention to if you want to learn more. On June 8th at 5 o'clock here, not in this auditorium, it will be up in the Harborview room, is the LifeWork graduation. And that's a wonderful event to hear the stories, like the stories I told you about Sarah and Stormy. A couple of women speak and tell their stories at that event. We'll have 3 women, because Sarah will speak as well. And it's really a celebration of their incredible determination and resilience and the really hard things they have come from and through that I didn't even begin to get into. So that's a fun one. And then October 25th will be our leadership breakfast, which will be at UMass Dartmouth. And we'll talk about the economic blueprint for women there and what is happening in the areas we talked about that we're trying to work with community leaders to drive forward some change. Does that answer some of what you were hoping to hear? Thanks for asking. I didn't plant that question, but I'm grateful for it. Yeah, because these solutions we need a big group working together on, definitely. Oh, okay.
Could you say a little bit more about the status of the universal pre-K in New Bedford? What are the politics around it, or the pros, cons, so forth?
Sure. What I can tell you what I know, and that is that it is a big priority for Superintendent Durkin, among many priorities, and that New Bedford received a state planning grant to figure out how, last year, to figure out how would they do this. And they partnered with a lot of local child care providers to develop a model that some cities are looking at, which is not just to kind of put a pre-K in every elementary school. There's really not the physical space for that, but to use state funds to partner with the YMCA, with North Star, with Little People's, so that they would add on classes, essentially, take in additional students. So they've mapped out a plan, and now the challenge is to fund it. and that's both, it's predominantly a state, but also a local issue. So to whatever extent the superintendent puts money in her budget for pre-K, that's something that people should support. As we know, the budget goes through its process and what gets cut out and what the final number is. And so there's always some politics in that. And I think it's something that's generally supported, but it's a question of where does it stack up against other things for different folks. At the state level, this is gaining a lot of support. It's really the financial question of how do we invest in it. So there's a bill that would start by investing in, schools that are cities that have poor performing schools, based on what level they're at, schools that have gotten a grant and already have a plan in place, and schools that have demonstrated economic, need and low percentages of kids in pre-K. So that would include definitely Fall River, and New Bedford meets all of those criteria. So that we just have to pass that bill, and it's also, there's been some increased money for it in the budget process that's happening right now at the state level, which is very good. And that's one of the things we talked about when we went up to the State House for Women's Advocacy Day last week. But I would say for those of you that have been, are, or want to take any action, definitely call your state senator and representative and urge them to support funding for universal pre-K and funding for child care providers, as well as support the bill. So I would say, ultimately, it might be a question of raising revenues to really bring that model bigger, but right now the next step is really getting the bill passed and a little bit more money in the budget.
Val, do you know if any programs, say on the high school level or earlier, that are encouraging girls to go into non-traditional roles such as carpentry, plumbing,
Right.
that sort of thing? And I'm wondering if anyone's thinking about doing exclusive girl classes. We used to have home ec, I'm sure a lot of you remember home ec and shop. And some places used to have home ec for boys, shop for girls.
Right. That's a great question. I know for sure at Voc, all the students, I think, are required to rotate through everything. And so there's exposure, and then there's, of course, then what people choose. In other places, there are little pockets of things. There's some summer camps, there's some day programs. UMass Dartmouth has traditionally done, and I think they're still doing, a day for girls to be exposed to STEAM. They come to campus. There's a camp that Junior Achievement developed last summer, I think, called Spark, it uses entrepreneurship as the umbrella. It's really about leadership, but it incorporates financial literacy and some things. There are it's included in Girl Scout programming, Girls Inc., which is actually Taunton-based. We don't have it right here, but they do some STEAM education work. And what I'll say is that in our Economic Blueprint for Women work, there was a committee looking at some of these issues around elementary and secondary school age girls. And some of the things that they want to do next are start a kind of bigger program, or I think just a program period, on exposing girls to non-traditional careers. So doing a kind of speakers bureau and pulling in a cadre of women in these careers to come and talk to the girls. They're also looking at mentorship opportunities, and they also want to bring in JA and Girl Scout programming so that every girl in the public school system can access it. Now that's a long-term goal, but that's what they're looking at, is some of those existing programming. Girl Scout has definitely some STEAM, it's not limited to that, and JA has sort of more financial literacy component to it. So there's little pieces, I think, going on, and in the New Bedford School District's effort to do better on STEAM overall, everything from, updating very old textbooks, et cetera, I haven't heard of anything focused specifically on girls. I think there used to be a STEAM club for girls, or a STEM club for girls. It might have been at the high school level. But I know there's folks, we're developing conversations with folks in the school district in New Bedford at this point who are interested to keep figuring out how to do more. I know there are really interesting programs in other places. I think there's definitely more to do to bring those here. others may know about some programs I don't know about as well. I don't know if that's... There was some nice programming at the Ocean Explorium that's no longer with us, unfortunately, but so I think this is my exit cue.
Please keep talking.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh. Are there more questions? I thought I saw another hand. No. Well, thank you all for your interest and your questions, and I hope you learned something interesting and that you feel like you can do something about it, actually, because that's just as important, and you definitely can, and people definitely are. So I look forward to being on that journey with you. Thanks.
I'd like to thank Valerie for her informative and kind of scary talk. I wish we could do more for our women and girls. This is the last class in the New Bedford Whaling Museum session for this semester. Next semester, we'll be doing talks about the galleries and then tours of the galleries. Each speaker will tour a gallery with you after the talk. I want to thank Sarah Rose for her ongoing commitment to this project and to the Whaling Museum for hosting us. Thank you.